that has to be one of the most energized PC speaker openings I've ever heard in a game. But anyways, today on Ancient DOS Games, we're doing Serve and Volley. Now, this is a tennis game that doesn't exactly play like you might think a tennis game would. This game's all about three things. It's about timing, it's about position, and it's about numbers. Once you figure those things out, it gets pretty easy, but until then, it can actually be a pretty difficult and challenging game. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. First, let's quickly go over the game stats. Serve and Volley was developed by Artec Studios and published by Accolade in 1988, which makes it the oldest game covered on Ancient DOS Games so far. It's a 1 to 2 player tennis simulation game, and it features multiple graphics modes, though looks its best using the Tandy or EGA 320 by 200 by 16 color modes. It only has PC speaker sound, but considering how old the game is, that's kind of to be expected. And as for its release date, I have absolutely no idea. I've tried looking for information or places to buy this game, and I just can't find anything about it. So as far as I can tell, it's still commercial. And good luck finding the game. Actually, Artec Studios is still around, so maybe we could actually petition them or something to get their old games up online. And if you're listening to Artec Studios, hint hint. Actually, despite that energized opening we just had, this game's actually pretty devoid of sound effects. There's a ball bouncing sound effect, but aside from that, it's a pretty silent game. Though, actually, that ball bouncing sound effect doesn't even work properly in DOSBox. If I load the game up on one of my old systems, the sound for the bouncing ball works fine. But in DOSBox, it only plays like 1% of the time. No idea why. I've tried everything to get it working, but just enjoy the silence, and I'll just try my best to make this a little more entertaining. So as you've probably noticed by now, this game does not play like your typical tennis game nowadays. Instead, what ends up happening is you're pretty much just watching the action unfold, and you have certain boxes in the top corners of the screen, one for each player. And the idea is that there's a bar that goes up the box to select what kind of shot that you want to perform for returning your opponent's shot or for serving the ball yourself, and then when it reaches the top, it quickly goes back down the other side, and you have to hit the button again when it's in the middle of that little green zone. And if you do that, you return the shot successfully. And if you fail to get the bar stopped in that green zone, you miss the shot in some way, and the opponent gets the point instead. So, it kind of actually almost plays like one of those golf games, because, golf games, you have the bar that goes up, you hit it at 2 points, and there you go, you make your shot, and this game's kind of like that. But there is obviously more to it than just hitting the button at the right time. It also depends on the stats of the players playing. And when you actually create a player, though you don't actually have to create a player, the game actually has some pre-made for you, but generally speaking, you want to create your own guy. And when you do so, you have a choice between 3 different stats, or not so much stats. There's 3 bars and then 2 stats on each side of the bars. So it's sort of like pairs of stats. And when you increase one, you decrease the other. And the different pairs are speed and endurance, forehand and backhand, and power and accuracy. Now, speed and endurance is the first pair, and generally speaking, you only really need the speed if you're not really good at moving around the court. Once you get good at actually moving around the court, you might want to have a little more endurance just so you don't get fatigued as much, because when you get fatigued, your accuracy goes down and it gets harder to hit the ball. But having high speed allows you to move around the court more quickly, which means you can get into the right position to hit the ball more easily, and if you don't get into the position properly ahead of time, then you'll still be able to hit the ball back. And that's kind of important. So it's generally speaking, speed is better if you're a newer player, and endurance is better if you're very, very good at this game. Now, forehand and backhand, I'm not exactly sure how these work. I've noticed that if you have it set closer to forehand or closer to backhand, you're more likely to perform those shots. But I think what actually happens is because forehand and backhand are the same selector when you're returning a shot, I think what ends up happening is the game calculates which of those you're more likely to hit, more likely to successfully hit based on whether you prefer forehand or backhand shots, and then basically returns that kind of shot depending on which one is going to be the best one to return. At least that's my theory of how it works. I just leave it centered because that just seems like the best idea in my case. And then the last 2, power and accuracy, are pretty straightforward. Power makes it so that it's harder for your opponent to return your shots, and accuracy makes it so it's easier for you to return your opponent's shots. Though it doesn't really factor in too much if your opponent does a really good shot. It's like, I mean, the idea is that that little green area is actually sort of like an error zone, and the further you are from the middle white line in that green area, the easier it is for your opponent to return that shot. And if you actually hit that white line exactly, it actually becomes much more difficult for your opponent to return the shot. And this actually can also result in what I like to call perfect serves, where if you're serving the ball and you hit that white line exactly, your opponent has to also hit that white line exactly to return that shot. Otherwise, won't be able to return it at all. Though that only works if it's like your first serve. If you're on a second serve because you messed up your first one, then you don't get that perfect accuracy potential. But then it's also easier to make a second serve than a first one as well. So here's what's actually going on during the game. You basically have 5 controls, 4 movement controls, and a button for selecting things. Now, when you serve the ball, you have a choice between a flat type shot, a slice shot, or a topspin shot. Though I don't actually know what kind of difference they make, but I just picked them at random. But anyways, you have a choice between those shots. You can also aim where you want to hit the ball, and obviously certain areas are going to be harder to hit than other areas. So when you aim the ball, you'll notice that your margin of error that is acceptable changes. So you hit the ball the way you want to, and then it becomes your opponent's attempt to return the ball to you, and then you keep returning the ball back and forth until one of you misses hitting that ball back. And when you're actually returning the ball, you get a choice between 3 different ways of returning it. You can either attempt a volley or smash, you can attempt a lob, or you can attempt a forehand or backhand. The volley smash option is the hardest one to perform, but it's also the hardest one for your opponent to return. So when you have a good chance of performing a volley or a smash, usually it's a good idea to take advantage of that. Now, the specific type of shot you return, whether it be a volley shot or a smash shot, is going to depend on how close you are to the ball. If you're in the right position for a volley shot, then it's going to instantly bring that bar down on the other side the moment that ball gets close to you. So volleys are actually extremely hard to pull off in this game, but when you do it, it's going to be really difficult for that opponent to return your shot. Smashes, on the other hand, are just really fast shots, and if the bar reaches the top, it'll be a smash shot. Lobs, on the other hand, are the easiest shots to make, but then again, they're also the easiest shots for your opponent to return because of how slowly they move. So a lob is generally a good approach to take if you're not really in a good position to return the shot, or if your fatigue is high, or if you're just not confident about hitting that ball back. Lob's the way to go. And then forehand, backhand is just, your average kinds of shots. I don't know if there's an actual difference between a forehand or backhand shot, but for all intents and purposes, it is pretty much just your average sort of shot back. Now, when you're actually waiting for your opponent to return a shot to you, you actually have the ability to move around the court, or rather sort of pick the general area you want to move to, because this is kind of important for your positioning, because when the opponent returns the shot, if you're in the right position, you'll have a better chance of hitting the shot back to him. But if you're in the wrong position, then assuming you actually get into the right position, you're not going to have as big a chance of hitting that ball back either. So getting yourself in the right position is important, and knowing what kind of position to pick based on where your opponent is aiming is also kind of important. If your opponent's at the top right of the court and he's aiming for the middle on your side, chances are you want to be at the bottom left of the court on your side, because when the ball hits the middle from where he is, it's going to approach that area, and that's where you want to be to return the shot. So position is really important in this game, as is, the timing for hitting your shot and just the general numbers from everything. So that's all it comes down to, really. There's a bunch of configuration options too for when you're starting a game. You can choose how many matches you're playing, or you can choose what kind of court you want, or where you want the court to be. I don't know if those particular choices have anything to do with how the ball reacts. I've not really noticed any difference between playing on the hard court, grass, or clay in this game, but there might be a difference. And if there is, I haven't noticed it. And there's actually also a tournament mode, and the tournament mode basically allows you to play an 8-player tournament, and the players can either be human-controlled or they can be computer-controlled, and you just go through the tournament and bring it down to the last 2 paired together and find out who's the champion. Like right now, I'm actually on my last match with an opponent in the tournament mode, and once I beat this guy, It's all over. I've got the trophy. Actually, that's quite the smug look on that guy's face. Is that... Actually, you know what? Maybe I'm not so happy to have that trophy, because I don't think I'd want to be that smug. Or maybe it's just the EGA 16 color graphics getting in the way. Maybe that guy'd look better in CGA. Oof. Okay, maybe he doesn't look better in CGA. I don't know, it was worth a shot. So I just have a couple last things to mention before talking about how to get this game working. Basically, there's also a difficulty select, and this entire time I've been showing you gameplay footage on the hardest skill setting. Right now I'm showing you gameplay footage on the easiest skill, and as you can see, the ball goes a lot slower. And the opponent's also more likely to make mistakes in this mode as well. So the skill level is more affects just how fast the game goes, so the more rapidly you can respond to things, the higher you can play the skill level on. And on the hard skill, it's not really that difficult once you know what you're doing. And the other one last thing I'll mention, which I don't actually have any footage of, is if you actually press F10 after somebody misses a shot, or after the ball goes out or something, it will actually give you a breakdown of why that happened. And you can actually see all the numbers that are being calculated to bring up the result. And that's kind of a neat feature. And I don't know if it's actually documented in the manual, because I kind of lost the manual a long time ago, but it's in the README file, which is kind of surprising, because a lot of these old games didn't have README files. This one does, though. So DOSBox. This is actually one of the first copy-protected games I've got working in DOSBox, where the copy protection actually doesn't read through properly in DOSBox. So to actually get it working, I kind of had to break the copy protection. And that's not something I recommend most of you do, is because it involves modifying the original game's files, and you don't really lose your original game files. And then there's just the whole legal issues with like distribution of these kinds of things. So really, only break the copy protection as a last resort in order to play a game like this that you legitimately own, that you have a right to play, but for some reason can't play because the copy protection is stopping you. It's the only time I recommend you do something like that. Other than that, though, short of the sound effects not working properly for some reason after you pass the title screen, the game actually works pretty well in DOSBox. You can run it on the max or auto settings, though the title screen music might go a little fast if you do that. So you actually don't need a high cycles count. If you set the cycles to 2000, the game will actually run pretty well. And the graphics filters do make this game look a lot better. In fact, most 16-color games or 4-color or monochrome or any of those will generally look better with the graphics filters. And lastly, the controls they're okay for the most part, even though they're really simple. Like, I mean, each player only has 5 buttons. You may still want to change them just a little, because they can be a little awkward, because you only use one hand to use the controls, and you have to sort of move your finger to the middle, because it's clustered like a plus sign. You got up, down, left, and right, and then your select button's right in the middle of that. And the second player's controls aren't even on the keypad. They're on the right side of the alpha keys. So you can always remap those to the keypad so that the two players playing on the same keyboard are not so close together. And that's pretty much all I got to say about Serve and Volley. Like, I mean, it's one of the simplest tennis games out there, so that makes it actually surprisingly fun to play even now. Like, I mean, I played a modern tennis game more recently, and the controls are just all over the place. It's really hard to play a modern tennis game compared to this one. So if you want a tennis experience that doesn't have that really complex control layouts or anything, then this actually suffices pretty well. So stay tuned for episode 9, and I'll be covering a game that has Christian Eriksen in his first starring role. Any idea what game that might be? Well, if you do or don't, stay tuned and find out.